Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Nan Tien 2030 campaign workshop for today. My name's Tom, and I'll be the MC. Firstly, let's acknowledge country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And let's continue to learn from Indigenous ways. I've just been reading a brand new book, Dreaming Path by Paul Callahan and Uncle Paul Gordon, which has been most illuminating and very educational about lots of fascinating things about Aboriginal culture and life. Our workshop today is Journey to the Symbiocene, and just to kick us off with some participation, perhaps you'd like to put one sentence into the chat of the kind of future that you would like to see emerge as we go forward with a spiritual and environmental practice. So please just type your vision into the chat as we work through the introduction. So by sharing in this way, it's a great way for us to see ourselves in this workshop situation. And so we can get a feel for what we're thinking about and feeling as a community. So it's quite a powerful and important thing to be able to do, to share in this way. The 2030 campaign is a spiritual and environmental community of practice. When we say spiritual, that means the spiritual that you bring with you. There's a lot of diversity, and that's a good definition, I think. And this can be ethics and values as well. And as we're in a community space, let's remember to listen respectfully and with acceptance of others' views and experience. And let's be mindful and make the spiritual our first port of call, seeing others, seeing ourselves, being mindful of our reactions and choosing our response from the spiritual that you bring with you. So while another person is talking, please give them your full attention. Today, our format, we'll have a short check-in led by Venerable Miao Yo from Nan Tien Temple. Professor Glenn Albrecht is kindly with us after a hectic drive through the rain. And he will be elaborating on from his book and experience and work about his book Earth Emotions, a bit more of a focus on secular spirituality and on the Symbiocene and what this means to us. After that, setting that context in a way, we'll do an earth art session. And so this is allowing us to express through art things about our current situation, the Anthropocene, things and how we're feeling and what we think about the journey, and also what we think and feel about the vision of the Symbiocene, where we're living with mutual benefit with the planet. And that will be facilitated by Nissa and Ryan with some music as well. So if you have a sheet of paper that you can draw on and some pens, pencils, please do so. We'll follow that with a breakout room discussion and come back for a plenary discussion before closing. And to connect with us as a community, you can subscribe to our newsletter and also get to chat to us on Facebook as well at the moment. And so over to Reverend Yo for a short check-in.
Okay, to me, good afternoon, everybody, and just welcome back again to our workshop, the first one for the year 2021. So let's take a few moments, a few minutes just to settle in to wherever we are or wherever we rush from, rather. So let's take a moment to focus within ourselves by taking a few deep breaths, breathing in and breathing out, and letting go and relaxing. So this checking in, it's not really meditation, but it's just to check in, to be mindful of where our mind is, where our body is, and so that we can be fully mindful of what's about to come. So take a few moments, focusing on our breath, letting go of any thoughts that may arise in our mind. Don't have to think about them now. Just relax and staying in body and in mind in this moment. Just focusing on our breath. Breathe in, breathe out, and letting go. So in a moment, we'll come back together. Hopefully we're feeling more refreshed. You can slowly open your eyes. If you want to rub your palms together, you may do so. Otherwise, take a little stretch. Ready to come back as a group, listening mindfully, listening respectfully, and we'll welcome our speaker for this workshop, Dr. Glenn Albrecht. And welcome back, because last year we had a session with Dr. Glenn Albrecht before. So this time we're going to be talking about journey to Symbiocene. So Dr. Glenn Albrecht is an honorary associate in the School of Geosciences at the University of Sydney, New South Wales. He retired as Professor of Sustainability, Murdoch University, in mid-2014. He continues to work as an environmental philosopher and published a book called Earth Emotions. He currently lives at the Wallaby Farm on Wonnarua land in New South Wales. He describes himself as a farmosopher, combining thinking and writing with growing food and protecting a haven of wildlife, while he is best known for creating the concept of solastalgia, or the lived experience of negative environmental change. His most recent work develops the meme of the Symbiocene, a future state where humans reintegrate with the rest of nature. So let's welcome Dr. Glenn Albrecht. Thank you.
It's lovely to be with you all, and thank you very much for that introduction. The theme, the journey to the Symbiocene, I'll be tackling through the idea of a secular spirituality, which I will explain as I go, but I've got some slides that I can put up and share with you so that you can see the spelling of some of these terms that will be new for you, and hopefully that will be helpful. And so I'll share my screen with you now. I'm very pleased to meet with you all and to be able to expand on some of the themes that I discussed with you last year. So this journey from where we are now to the Symbiocene, a future state, I describe as the need for us to exit the Anthropocene and begin to move towards something which is, in a sense, it's opposite, but it will contain elements of life as we know it now, but our disintegration with nature is now so profound that it will appear as if we need a really major, almost revolutionary change to get back into nature. However, I think it's possible. My work is involved in a fairly optimistic view of human nature, and that our scientific name, Homo sapiens, we're actually going to be worthy of that scientific name. The sapien is supposed to be translatable as wise, as intelligent. So for those of you that have never heard of the Anthropocene before, it's an attempt to describe a geological state of the earth where humans, the anthropos, are now the most powerful and the most effective movers and shakers of everything on the earth. And that includes the geology, the climate, the biodiversity, the big cycles of carbon and water. Everything that moves and shakes on this earth is now being dominated by humans. And so geologists have actually argued that we need to describe this period of the Earth's history and its geological foundations as the Anthropocene. So literally translated, it means the age of humans, or the age of the dominance of humans, if you wish to put it that way. And so we don't need really to go through in detail about what the Anthropocene is all about. It's a legacy that is now being experienced by people worldwide in varying degrees, but everywhere we're seeing climate change of a negative kind. We're still living with nuclear waste from our warfare accidents. We're also living in the age of plastic. In fact, some people have described the current period of history that we're in as the Plasticocene. It's so dominant in our environment and in us that we consume a good amount of plastic every week in just the food that we eat. So this pollution, this extinction of species, these radical changes to the Earth's patterns and rhythms is a real problem. And of course, we won't be able to continue to live in this way indefinitely. Some people think that the idea of moving to another period in history is perhaps utopian or overly optimistic. I tend to see it the other way around, is that what's utopian and overly optimistic is that we can actually stay in the Anthropocene for very much longer. And I don't need to tell you that we can now add warfare and the total destruction that that can bring to humanity on top of the massive climatic and environmental damage that we're doing to ourselves. And I won't say anything more about warfare because I'm sure you're all aware of what's going on in Europe at the moment. So the signs of the Anthropocene, as I read them, are entirely negative. And they're things that suggest to me that we have to get out of the Anthropocene as soon as possible. We can't afford to stay in it any longer. The climate science is telling us that we've got until the end of this decade to bring our carbon emissions back to what is sometimes called carbon neutral. But we really need to be addressing every dimension of our environmental problems. We can't just see the climate and somehow in isolation from everything else. So I'm now 69, or at least I will be on the 5th of March. So I've lived through a period of what's called the Great Acceleration. The Anthropocene since my birth on the 5th of March, 1953, has gone gangbusters. And so what we're seeing, in addition to the material destruction of the Earth, is an equivalent amount of damage being done to the emotional and psychological basis of humanity, again in varying degrees, some people more so than others. But you know, professional psychiatrists and psychologists are now talking about a pandemic of depression in humans. We're dealing with a huge amount of anxiety in our children the world over. The existential philosophers talking about angst, grief, dread, and despair would be having a field day now. It's almost the equivalent of what we experienced during the Second World War, which was one of the periods and the stimulus for the creation of existential philosophy. So our emotions, I describe them, our emotions connected to the Earth, or Earth emotions, are now being seriously challenged by the forcing, as climate scientists would call it, the forcings of the Anthropocene on ourselves, as well as on the biophysical foundations of the Earth. So we must reassess the basis of our lives and our lifestyles, our technologies. It's really, we have to reassess everything. And the this changes everything moment has already occurred. And my contribution to you and to others that are willing to enter this idea of the need for radical change is to say that we can do it. We need a vision of the future which is powerful enough to give us the incentive to really move rapidly out of what we're doing now and into something new. So these are suggestions that I make. I see ethics and spirituality as central to the shift that we're going to take. Without ethics and spirituality, I think we'll be lost in some kind of materialist techno world, and it might even be worse than the one that we're leaving. So I see the centrality of human ethics and human spirituality in everything that can possibly come next. I'll also talk about us being in the age of solastalgia, a word that was mentioned in my introduction. It is a state of our psyche, of our emotional structure, which I'll explain briefly in a moment. But the age of solastalgia is something that we wish to avoid at all costs. And so I'll be trying to defeat my concept of solastalgia by creating its opposite, the Symbiocene, and most of you would never have heard of either of them, so I'm going to have to do a bit of hard work to convince you. So, solastalgia is the lived experience of negative environmental change, and it's a term that comes from my work that I did with colleagues at the University of Newcastle on the impact of open-cut coal mining on people in the Upper Hunter. We also did work on the impact of prolonged and serious drought on farming people. So there's a field work involved in this idea, as well as it being something which came out of the mind of a philosopher. This negative experience is one that is well explained if you try and empathize with what it's like to be a farmer living in a rural area where you're used to clean air, a beautiful night sky, nothing but the calling of birds, a rich and productive place for agriculture, a place that sustained the Wanneroo people of the Upper Hunter for tens of thousands of years. For it to be converted into these open cuts, which you can see on the image before you, that's the Bengalla mine, and it's a couple of kilometres long, it's half a kilometre wide and a half a kilometre deep. And some of the little specks that you see inside that mine are actually trucks. One of them, the white one towards the background, is an electric shovel, which is one of the largest pieces of machinery in the world. So it can pick up in one scoop the equivalent of a few houses worth of what they call overburden, dump it into a truck, and that hole just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. So my work on solastalgia was to try and explain the distress that people felt when their home environment, a place that they loved, was being desolated. And it seemed that there was nothing in the English language to describe that desolation as it related to a person's sense of place, their sense of belonging, or even their identity. I have to be careful with the word identity because it's being used in so many different contexts at the moment. But if you're a rural person, if you're an Indigenous person, you have an identity and it's tied to your sense of place. And so these people were having their sense of place annihilated, being taken away from them. They were powerless to get it back. They tried through the courts, they tried through public protest, but in all respects, they were being defeated. And so this notion of solastalgia is also part of the Anthropocene. I see the two concepts as intimately related. The more we desolate our home environment, which is now the whole earth, the more we experience an emotion like solastalgia. And it should come as no surprise to you that this term has its origins with the concept of nostalgia, which, although in modern terms means something like a feeling of that you wish to return to another time in history, a feeling of that the past is better than the present. The original definition of nostalgia was from Dr. Hoffer in 1688, and it was seen as a form of melancholia, a form of distress, both physical and mental, that you would feel if you were absent from home and desperately wish to return. So you could, in English, you would call it homesickness. And so this idea of homesickness is built into your relationship to the earth from 1688 onwards. The issue with solastalgia is that I needed a concept where, instead of wishing to return home, you want your home to stay where it is. You stay in the physical place that you think is home, but in fact, your home is moving away from you. It's being taken by a mine. It's being taken away by climate change. So much so that people are now experiencing life in a fixed place with a climate that has changed so much that you would have to move another 150 to 200 kilometres further south in Australia, for example, to actually live in the same climate that you had 50 years ago. So this profound change needed a concept, and I created it with solastalgia. And the other point that I wish to make early is that part of the Anthropocene is to understand the psychological dimensions of our relationship to place, home, the earth, and I guess what you would call the bounties of the earth, its richness. And so this is where, and I don't wish to sound as if it's overly theoretical. I'm just hoping that for the elements of various strands of Buddhism, the Buddha was well known for, for suggesting that one of the greatest illusions that humans have is that the self or the I, or what we would call the ego, is somehow permanent, somehow unable to be addressed or critically evaluated, and that there are many people now who now see the excessive individualism, excessive ego as one of the problems that leads to the Anthropocene. So we're seeing a psychological dimension that has been identified in a world spiritual path for a very long time. Well, at least 2,500 years, if I've got my timing right on the Buddha. And we've got people like, I read Tom Oliver, I'll try and get it, I'm not sure if it's going to be in focus or not, but a book called The Self-Delusion, The Surprising Science of How We Are Connected and Why That Matters. And we've got another Tom here. Tom says we can be released from suffering only if we let go of our delusions by realizing that the self itself is an illusion. So this essence of the Anthropocene, the selfish individualism, is part of why it is that we must move out of the Anthropocene and move into the Symbiocene. And I'm not sure if the state of nirvana will be achieved within the Symbiocene, but I think it's got a much better chance than anything else that I've looked at. So let's begin the journey. So Symbiocene as a word comes from symbiosis, which was invented in the 19th century, late 18th century, by a bunch of scientists that were interested in the relationship between fungi and plants. And since that discovery, the symbiosis, we've seen the science progress gradually, so that now we realize that humans are in fact more than human themselves. We are an organism, or sometimes described as a holobiont, multiple organisms existing in the one time and in the one place. So we've got viruses, bacteria, fungi that live inside us. We've got parasites that live on us. Some of you will be shocked to learn eyelash hairs. And if they didn't do that, we'd probably get infections in our eyelashes. So we are in fact a seething soup of things that aren't us. So the very idea that we should think of ourselves as purely human, as ego, as I, is absurd from a scientific perspective, and was always thought so by wise sages in the past. So we are not what we thought we were. Somehow or another, during the Enlightenment, through to the Industrial Revolution and into this period that we now call the Anthropocene, we've separated ourselves off from big life, and we've exterminated many of the megafauna of the world. Then we reach a point in fairly recent history in science where we realize that we're actually holobionts, multiple creatures existing in the one place at the one time. And that should have revolutionized our view of the self and our relationship to the rest of nature. But it really has not got through to the bulk of humanity that the most important to the big, from the microscopic to the large. And that what these various life forms are doing is working with each other to share this thing we call life. So your life as an individual person is being shared by trillions of other organisms hard at work within you and on you to share the one life. And that again, in English, it didn't have a name that, apart from life, which I think is not particularly enlightening. So I gave it a name. I call it the biocommunion. And that's the shared life that we have with multiple organisms in the one place and in the one time, things that we call bodies. And so when you look at bodies carefully under a microscope, you find that it's, there's gases coming out, there's organisms like viruses and bacteria coming out. Every time we breathe in a microbiome, which, we share with other people in the room. We've learned about the microbiome through COVID, but there's a lot more to it than that. So this idea of the biocommunion, a community of organisms that share the one life, I think is critical for our understanding of our place in the life of this earth. So to be a holobiont is to be a not self, another concept which is well established within Buddhism, anatta. The idea that we hold life in not self to become much more profound than it was before. Now, I'm being told that my internet connection is unstable. Please tell me, Tom, if there's any problem, and I can switch to voice only if that works. I'm totally unstable all of the time, so to have my internet being unstable as well just brings me into harmony with my computer.
I think it's okay, Glenn.
Is it okay?
Yeah. It's a bit unstable.
And give me an idea of my... All right.
But we can still hear what you're saying.
Excellent. So I don't want to say a lot about the biocommunion, except to say that it's strange, isn't it, that we don't have a word in English to describe what's going on inside us other than a word like life, which covers everything. And life, what I wanted to do was to have a term that brings out the idea of the community of life. And that's the essence of this term that I've created. To share, to have things in common, to have life in common is actually such a profound idea that we need to have it at the forefront of our thinking. So the Symbiocene, now that we've got the idea that we're symbiotically coordinated ourselves, that our relationship to other organisms is through symbiosis. It's also through evolution by competition, but what I'm suggesting is that at least these two are equally important. One of them we've seen dominating our thinking for the last, couple of hundred years under the idea of distance. Nature read in tooth and claw and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure you know about it. But the idea of the symbiote, this is the case because, for example, the green cells in trees, the things that make for green trees were once free-living cyanobacteria of the green variety and have been enveloped by the chloroplasts of trees and are now an integral part of a tree. So bacteria in trees are now part of a single organism. And we find those relationships now in so many different places that it's now accepted that within evolution, our existence, our life systems are animated by symbiosis. So if we want to acknowledge this symbiosis as a foundation of life, we have to start thinking about how to replicate in our human lives the very things that we want to do in supporting the rest of life. It's not as if we can develop our own communities, our own cities, even our whole societies, somehow independently of the rest of life. We think we can do that. We even think that we can kill the rest of life with the things we call sides. biocides, insecticides, fungicides, you name them, we've got something that will kill the rest of life. But we have to start thinking about how we can replicate or mimic in our human communities ways of doing things that are consistent with the rest of life. And so symbio-mimicry, where we reproduce the forms and processes that are already present in living systems, in our own systems of our societies. I mean, they've been around for 4 billion years. They've been tried and true. It's probably a good idea that we go with the flow rather than trying to create something which is the opposite ourselves. And in doing that, I think we'll discover something that I call symbiophilia, which is the love of living together within this stage, this era that I call the Symbiocene, a period that's going to be dominated by our reconnections to the rest of life. Is going to involve our loving the rest of life. And that might also be a radical thought for some people. So the material aspects of this, just in case I've got people that are engineers and technological types that are thinking, what is this guy on about? Well, a lot of it's very simple. It's the same sort of theme that David Attenborough, David Suzuki, and other people like Vandana Shiva have been on about for a long time. It's a crazy society that produces things that are poisonous for ourselves, that are toxic for the waterways. So we have to start thinking about stop doing that which is destroying ourselves. And that's a fairly simple conclusion to reach, that why would any species want to keep putting toxic waste into its own environment? We also need to start thinking about how we can respect our kinship and our relationships with other sentient beings. Again, a foundation of Buddhist thinking. We have to think about how we can balance our own interests with those of other beings. And we do that automatically in our own bodies when we're healthy, because we have no choice. We have to be in balance with our gut bacteria, otherwise they'll tell us that something's going wrong. They regulate our blood pressure as well, so we've got to be friends with them. And where we've destroyed the connections between ourselves and the rest of life, the Symbiocene becomes a period in which we rebuild, we repair, we put back in place these relationships that we've in ignorance broken, or at times deliberately broken. So the Symbiocene is an idea that reconnects human culture and reconnects it back to what we call nature. We know that this is the foundation of life, or a foundation, and that interconnectedness between things is the norm, and that isolation and selfishness is in fact a path towards sickness, ultimately death and extinction. So the need for this term to describe the spiritual shift that we need to make is something that exercised my mind, and I'll conclude by briefly saying something about that. So there's a word in Indo-European languages, which is the word ged. Now, we don't use ged very much in our modern languages, but it's the root word for, in Old English and German, for words like together, to gather, and good. That g sound is exactly where this ged origins comes from. We still use GH in words like ghosts, so it's not that unusual to find a GH word in the English language. But what I wanted to find was this connection between living together and a spiritual dimension to life that I could create in English, so that people who are not religious, and certainly not religious in the conventional institutional sense, that they didn't want somebody else to define for them what their spirituality was about. So I thought that we could create a new word, which I put together from the Ged of the Indo-European origins with the German Geist, which means spirit or a vital force or a life force. And so the Geist is my term for describing this spiritual vital force or life force that animates this life that we share with all other living things, from the micro to the macro. And it becomes important at the micro level because for many of us, we didn't even know that we are inhabited by trillions of other organisms. And so it comes as a shock to think that we have a relationship with them. So we might as well give that relationship in the spiritual connection a name as well. So the biocommunion is a kind of scientific biological way of describing that relationship that we have, the community of life. But it requires more than just a description. It requires that we love and wish to have an intimate relationship with that life as well. And that's why I created the Geist. So the Geist is the spirit or force which holds things together, a feeling of interconnectedness in life between the self and other beings, both human and non-human. And they're gathering together to live in shared earth places and spaces over deep time. So it's this empathy, this feeling of affinity that material, biologically orientated people feel. Like, I'm a bird watcher, and I have this feeling when I'm feeling close to the birds and close to the environment within which I see them. And it's definitely not material. It's probably emotional, but why not describe it as spiritual as well? Because it is a feeling that I have, which is drawing me out of myself. The bird is quite powerful enough to do that, and is engaging me in a way that says that I need to enter a much wider domain than myself in order to be sharing my life with a bird. So it's a non-religious term for acknowledging the life spirit that we all share, a way of acknowledging the good, which in, I guess, philosophical or psychological terms is associative. It brings things together rather than tears things apart. So it's got an ethical dimension as well. The bad is that which disintegrates and tears things apart. And there are plenty of other thinkers who have presented the ethical along similar lines. Erich Fromm and others have built whole traditions of thinking around that ethical connection. So to bring it to a conclusion, I think some people who are not formally religious might be relieved to find that there is a spirituality residing in them, which they can share with others, including non-human beings, in a way that replaces the otherworldly, if I can put it that way, with something within this world, which is intensely spiritual. So instead of there being a God or gods in a transcendent sense beyond this earth and beyond its atmosphere, we can start to think about the spirituality in everything. And as I put it in the slide, in every nook and cranny, not only in the outside, but also on the inside. We have to begin to think about ourselves as existing in dimensions that humans have found difficult to comprehend, at least modern humans. I'm not sure, I'm not speaking for all humans in the past either. So the Geist is in everything. And if you are open to it, you can feel it everywhere and within yourself. And it's an awareness of this biocommunion, because it's, as I say, it's about time we loved who, what and who we are. And so that's where I think I will draw to a close on that. I'll stop sharing my screen so that I become bigger or more impressive. And hopefully that leaves you with plenty of ideas from which to continue your discussion. The only other thing I wish to say is that if you find the idea of the Symbiocene appealing, and it sounds a lot better than the death and misery of the Anthropocene, you are already in it and you will never get out of it again. And so that's my gift to you, is that here's a meme that's like an earworm that you can't get rid of, but this one you'll enjoy because you'll want to keep it for the rest of your life. So thank you, Tom and Ling, for inviting me again, and thank you for Nan Tien to support me in bringing these ideas to you.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Can I actually say something? This is actually the book that Glenn is actually have written. And believe me, you cannot actually get them from the bookstore, because we went to the bookstore in the city and they said it's actually, they don't have it. You have to put in orders. So have a copy of this. Or you can actually buy it, like soft copy, like Nisa has done. It's a beautiful book. Thank you.
And so now we're on to our Earth Art session with Nisa and Ryan. And so over to Nisa and Ryan.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Safe journey.
Thank you so much, Glenn.
My pleasure. I'll listen to Nisa and Ryan for a second because I want to hear what you've got to do.
So thank you so much for offering your time to be here with all of us, and it's such an enlightening things that we just enlightening knowledge that we just heard from Glenn about how we can move forward together from understanding that we are spiritual beings and that honors with respect and trust. So if you have your art materials ready already, such as the papers, pens, pencils, or other materials, nature materials. For me, I have roses that was dried, and I might actually use those as kind of like collage in a way with drawing. So if you have some of those that you like to use, please feel free. Throughout the workshop, Ryan and I will offer the music, and I will offer some meditative practice together with some guidance. If you do feel in any times provoked by a strong emotions or anything that come through, please just remember to come back to your breath and the practice of connection with yourself. So over to you, Ryan. So as you listen to the sounds from natures and the music together, you might just take time to scan through first of how you feel your body, your own inner nature. And by tuning in, you offer respect to yourself. Giving the sense of trust that comes from your heart. And allow the breath here to be the bridge to help you listen more to your heart, to the inner spirit inside you. Knowing that any times that you feel overwhelmed, or any strong feelings, thoughts might come up, by returning to your breath, coming back to your safe environment, the true nature, the nature of love. And as you feel more anchored with your inner natures through your breath, being more presence with your body, you might feel more open to express how you feel or a certain visualization that might come through you on the papers by drawing or painting, or even in a form of creative writings or collage. An astral arrangement, perhaps a collage with different materials, or even an art that comes from the astral materials. Fully feel the relationship from your heart to your body and the chosen material that you use. So you can keep the space here for yourself to explore without any judgments. Explore with kindness. And practicing compassion along the way as you express yourself in whichever form that feels right in your heart today. And coming back perhaps to contemplate what Glenn has been talking today about the word symbiosis and what we learned this morning. How can we cultivate a positive and loving relationship with ourselves? And even though things changes as they do, just like right now on the journeys, you hear the sound of traffic that come through, sounds of the thunder. But lately we've been having fairly wet weather. We might experience these changes. And so you can check in with the relationship that you have with these changes. And and allowing the loving kindness to reign from inside out to nurture us. Taking times here to allow the emotion to come through, or if there's not much information come yet, just giving a space for ourselves to experience what's here. Sound that you can hear right now from our workshop, from Ryan's guitar, and the sound of the traffics, and the sounds around you. So you can experience the different relationship that you have with various sounds that maybe unveil the emotions inside you. A strong emotion or subtle emotions. And whatever it is, so you can keep the space here. Explore the journey. Journey with yourself. And the more that you understand yourself, you're able to understand the nature of life and others. Remember to breathe as your loving place returns yourself. The key element to facilitate life that all beings is part of this web of interconnectedness. You might even use mantras or a simple words or sentence in your own language, in your own way, to help you anchor your heart, your mind, to be here with your own inner nature, the awakening nature. I love to offer Sanskrit words, a language that comes from the sound in nature. Aham Prima, I am loved. My loving qualities that is so powerful by existing in all things. Aham, I am Prima, loved. As you remember that you are loved, you also remember that all things is part of this web of connection, that everything is connected. This quality is the blood, a hum creamer. I contemplate on a relationship that you currently have with the environment, whether locally or globally. Nature is close to you, whether it's your own garden, life, human life, and non-human life, maybe your loving pets. And the emotions that come through as you remember this connection. The emotion that you might be experiencing. As you can breathe through those emotions, open to feel. Allowing whatever that comes through here, again, perhaps you can express into the forms that feel right in the heart. Observing the material that you choose, the colors, the qualities. those materials. So taking the moments here as the music stops, so you can feel silent. And the waves of the sounds that might still come through to your heart, the messages. And you listen truly, respectfully, just to breathe consciously, to absorb the experience and the wisdom. I love to close the practice with us here with Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings be happy at heart. May our thoughts, our words, and actions contribute to that happiness in some ways. May all experience the sense of connectedness, a loving relationship. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to Ryan as well, and hand up to Tom.
Thank you, Nissa and Ryan, and thank you everybody for your participation. And please feel free to take a photo of your earth art and you can upload it into the chat if you're okay for us to share it more widely. So we can all see the kinds of things that we're thinking and feeling through this expression of our art. Now time for breakout rooms so that we can have more of a discussion about the secular spirituality and the Symbiocene, and perhaps just chat about what about your artwork and what you're thinking and feeling in relation to that.
was very enlightening to hear what Glenn said, what Glenn talked about this morning, and I was making some notes along the way, hoping that I can tap into the essence of what he talked about this morning.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, like that idea about how we already have bacteria all over us and stuff, and like,
yeah,
like I kind of had heard that fact before, but I never connected it in the sense of like, you know, we already are like a symbiotic entity or whatever you want to call it. Like we already are like all these other animals in one thing. So
yeah, so many things inside us that's already existing inside to help us. We live together inside, isn't it? All these bacteria and various organisms inside us. Yeah. Well, I was trying to do some art as well as trying to guide and to talk, but I got something. I will post it later.
It looks nice so far though. I like how you combine the drawing and the flower petals.
Yeah, well, I saved those rose petals from the Valentine's roses, and you know, I just love the smells of them, and I love the look of it. That it's very, very much this, you know, in a sense that, you know, they dry, they have, you know, not much life left in them, but they still have so much beauty. You know, the impermanent of the beauty of the impermanent of things. Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
It was so relaxing, very
Okay.
yeah.
See, we can be relaxed when we start to think about the Symbiocene.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
You'll be happy.
Relaxed, happy. Finally.
Joyful.
Finally I feel the joy. Finally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's like, this is what we want, right? We want to be in a good place as we take the journey.
It's very beautiful, Nisa and Ryan. It's lovely. It was fantastic. And I like the background music, you know, the nature, the sound, the birds and all that. It's just so relaxing. Yeah. Thank you. We should do more of that. We should do more.
I think you're on a winner. Great. So I think everybody's back from the breakout rooms. I'm sure you had wonderful discussions. And please, once again, in the chat, perhaps you could just put a couple of words, a couple of sentences about what transpired in body, mind, heart and spirit with, you know, discussions, any feelings just about the workshop and about what Glenn's saying or what you discussed or heard other people say. So that would be really good.
This is the first sort of like talk in the workshop for a very long time. So I like to thank everyone for attending. And Dr. Glenn Albrecht gave us a very enlightening talk. I really enjoyed that. And it sort of explains to me sometimes, you know, the good feeling that we get when we go into the bush and all that. It really, I find this whole thing, this environmental thing, it's very spiritual, but it's also very Buddhist. And because once the Buddha always said that we are part of nature, right? So our body is made up of, you know, the 4 great elements of nature, you know, water, earth, air, and fire. So it's all the great elements of nature. And I think that's why we feel so good when we go into the bush, when we are in nature, we are connected with nature. And that's why we can't ruin the environment. We can't ruin the earth. And if we destroy the earth, we are really destroying ourselves. So I think that's a very important message we need to get out, to let people know, because sometimes people don't see things. They see things as black and white, you know. So what is real, it's really not real. That's why we say we are deluded. Okay, so thank you all. So let's put our hands together and we transfer merits to all sentient beings. And so may kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity pervade all, and build affinities to benefit all beings. May chant, Pure Land, and precepts inspire equality and patience. May our humility and gratitude give rise to great vows. So thank you all and have a pleasant evening, and stay safe and thank you very much. For anyone who wants to continue and have a chat and have a talk with us, you're welcome to stay.